Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore. Sorry for that little skip in the beginning there. A very weird ending here in my home office. My television seems to be 2.5 minutes slower than the computer, so something happened in the last hour. So I was frantically trying to get all the correct numbers. So we hit a new all-time high today in the Dow Jones. That was the high, October 9th, 2007, 14,164. Got down to 65.47, March of '09. And I think officially they will call it, they are calling it 14,254. We did hit intraday today, 14,286. Pretty impressive, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the stock market. I'll just say the S&P is still shy of its all-time high, 1565, closing today at 1539. It's about 4:03 Eastern time, if these clocks are right. Sorry for confusion. The ISM services reading, a key reading, came in at 56 for February. That is good. Across the pond, the UK's services sector rose to 51.8 in February, a good sign. UK's retail sales for the month were up 2.7% from a year earlier. That's good. But the Euro area services reading for February fell to 47.9 from 48.6 in January. Last week's manufacturing reading in Europe was 47.9 as well. So recession numbers, baby. Also overseas, Tokyo's Nikkei finished up 0.3% to 11,683, the highest since September 2008. London up 1.4%, Paris up 2.1%, Frankfurt up 2.3%. Gold closed to $15.75, oil $90.88 on West Texas Intermediate, in the 10-year Treasury 1.90%. China's Shanghai index, after being down 3.7% on Monday, finished up 2.3% on Tuesday. I do have to mention, yesterday I was talking about the 60 Minutes piece discussing China's possible real estate bubble. A man I greatly respect, former Morgan Stanley economist Stephen Roach, who was chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia and is now at Yale, then came on Monday night on CNBC blasting the 60 Minutes report. I've always taken the Stephen Roach side against the Jim Chanos side of the China debate, though the 60 Minutes report raised my eyebrows, and Roach tried to beat it down, saying housing is only 5% of China's GDP, which is not going to bring the country down. China has been aggressive in moving preemptively to quell the action in housing, according to Roach. And he's right on that. And just the government just announced another round of measures. Roach says that today's ghost city is tomorrow's Shanghai. You have to build the cities in advance of the expected continued migration from the rural areas. So, today though, at the National People's Congress, as expected, the government set a GDP target of 7.5% for this year, the same as last year, though GDP ended up coming in at 7.8% for 2012. Premier Wen Jiabao, delivering his final report after 10 years in power, said we should unswervingly take expanding domestic demand as our long-term strategy for domestic development. The key to that change, he said, is to enhance people's ability to consume. Beijing is clearly looking to shift the economy away from a reliance on exports to one driven by domestic consumption. So the central government seeks to raise incomes and improve the safety net with a 27% increase in the healthcare budget to almost 42 billion. Wen also promised migrant workers will receive broader protections, including farmers' land rights. Back to housing, China's leaders started to bring house prices back into line with income, but that's done little to address the fundamental causes of China's property bubble. According to some analysts, limited alternative investment options for households, local government reliance on land sales as a source of finance, and the persistent belief that China's house prices can only go up meant the pressure for unsustainable price rises remains. Other analysts expect rising property sales and investment, the biggest single source of China's domestic demand, to provide a tailwind to growth into 2013. But a weaker property market will hit demand for everything from steel to furniture to a car to park in the garage. So commodity exporters like Australia and Brazil could still feel the pain. Separately, China is increasing its military spending, which they announced the full budget today, 10.7% to $115 billion. That's building on an unbroken succession of double-digit rises in the defense budget, and that $115 billion that is announced is, of course, a lowball figure. The government also announced that the domestic security budget will rise 8.7% to an amount that's even greater than the defense budget. Well, the clock is running out. When it comes to Iran, at the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee's annual conference in Washington, Senator John McCain told the group, that's the major pro-Israel lobby, that diplomatic efforts with Iran have failed and it's very clear that they are on the path of having a nuclear weapon. Vice President Biden addressed AIPAC. He said that Obama is not bluffing when he says he will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. We are looking to and ready to negotiate peacefully, but all options, including military force, are on the table, said Biden. Biden added, if, God forbid, the need to act occurs, it is critically important for the whole world to know we did everything in our power. We did everything that reasonably could have been expected to avoid any confrontation. And that matters because, God forbid, if we have to act, it's important that the rest of the world is with us. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu, speaking via satellite from Israel because he's back home still trying to form his coalition, which seems to be, the process seems to be going a little better. Netanyahu told AIPAC, diplomacy has not worked. Iran is running out the clock. It has used negotiations, including the most recent ones, in order to buy time to press ahead with its nuclear program. Netanyahu added that Iran had not yet crossed the red line he laid out in a speech to the United Nations last September, but he said we have to stop its nuclear enrichment program before it's too late. And he did make clear gaps between his position on Iran and President Obama's remain considerable, according to one analyst. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency Director Amano speaking at his agency's 35-nation governing board, called for Iran to allow access to a military base suspected of having housed nuclear weapon-relevant research. That, of course, is Parchin, where they are suspected of testing nuclear trigger devices. Amano said, "I request Iran once again to provide access to the Parchin site without further delay, whether or not agreement has been reached on a structured approach. Providing access to the Parchin site would be a positive step which would help to demonstrate Iran's willingness to engage with the agency on the substance of our concerns." But the IAEA has never been allowed in Parchin. That says everything. Iran is not providing the necessary cooperation to enable us to provide credible assurance about the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities. The agency therefore cannot conclude that all nuclear material in Iran is in peaceful activities. An editorial in the London Times: "The emptiness of Tehran's protest stations can be succinctly stated. To generate electricity, it is not necessary for Iran to have its own uranium enrichment facilities. All that a peaceful country need do is buy uranium more cheaply on the open market. Yet Iran demands access to the full fuel cycle and lies about what it has. As long as a decade ago, Tehran stood exposed for building illicit and clandestine facilities, specifically a uranium enrichment facility at Natanz and a heavy water plant at Iraq. These are not necessary for a civilian nuclear program, but make sense for a military one." In Syria, the exodus is accelerating so quickly, according to a piece by Taylor Luck in the Washington Post, that the tally of refugees is going to hit 1 million this week. 1/3 of those since January. You know, the Zatari camp I've talked about on these reviews and I've written about extensively. They had 500 tents back in August in that camp, and today there are 146,000 people there. The camp has a 60,000 person capacity. Now get this. Although the international community pledged to meet a $1.5 billion UN appeal in December for aid to Syrian refugees, the UN Refugee Agency says it has yet to receive 20% of the promised money. It has not received $300 million of the $1.5 billion pledged. Remember that figure, $300 million. I wrote this week in my Week in Review column, posted Saturday morning, in reference to Secretary of State John Kerry's new pledge to provide $60 million in non-lethal aid to Syrian rebels. I wrote, "Washington also claims it has previously provided $385 million in humanitarian aid to Syrians, but none directly to the rebels. This is a lie. Even the UN has said on many occasions that the gap between promises of aid and actual delivery of same is wide." I wrote that Saturday morning. The UN issued its report on Monday. $385 billion. The administration says it is delivered. UN saying they haven't seen $300 million from everyone together. This administration is flat out lying all the time about foreign policy, let alone a lot of other things. I don't know when the hell the administration is going to be held accountable for its foreign policy. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Jordan said, "We are facing rising needs, dwindling resources, and rising numbers at the border each day. This is nothing short of a perfect storm." With just 9% of its 57 million budget met, the UN Children's Agency in Jordan is set to scale back sanitation services and education programs while the World Food Program has reduced daily food rations in Za'atari nearly by half. UN agencies say they may soon be forced to stop distributing tents, blankets, and hygienic supplies. Planned camps in Jordan and other countries are likely to lack essentials such as purified drinking water. Well, that's all for today. I'm disgusted. Be back with you tomorrow, Wednesday. Remember the men and women of our armed forces. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers. Take care. Bye-bye.